This morning, the simple answer to why families are so disconnected in 2022 and how you, as the badass leader of your kingdom, going to town with your stories is a simple solution. Michael McLean, nobullbook.com, badassletter.com on an absolutely amazing early August morning. Lemon water, 15,000 steps, an hour of copywriting, an hour of reading, half-day success. Then I'll work on conquering the chaos of the afternoon, lunch, check my phone, respond to some emails, call some friends and clients, and then home. I'll pick up my daughter Emery at camp at 4 o'clock. Today the workday ends at 3 o'clock. Brain dump at 3:30, get all my stuff down on paper for what I'm going to be doing the next day. Out the door at 3:30 to pick up Emery, and home by 4:30, dinner at 6 p.m., and then every single night, 100% both feet in today, investing my time in the evenings with the people that matter the most to me. Own your morning, conquer the chaos of the afternoon, and invest, I repeat, invest your time, both feet in today. Be present in the evenings with the people that matter most to you. So, very, very interesting story in a 2013 New York Times article that talked about the disconnect in families today. Why are our families disconnected from each other? Why are our families falling apart? Why is our marriage divorce rate over the 50% mark now and climbing? Why are marriages failing? Why are fathers and mothers disconnected with their children? Why are families falling apart? And this article talked about a study that was done a handful of years earlier where they took two groups of children, and basically the bottom line from the study, it revealed something very, very interesting, almost shocking, that children that knew their family history, who knew their genealogy, knew their family history, they knew their roots, did better in life in terms of dealing with adversity, in dealing with issues. They had better self-esteem, and they were able to better deal with, the challenges that come up in life when they understood their family's history. They understood their family roots. They understood their family traditions. And of course, this happens when you, as the king of your family and your queen, pass on these traditions to your children, whether they're kids, whether they're teenagers, whether they're young adults. Do your children know your family traditions? Do they know your family history? Do they know your family genealogy? Do they know the stories of your past? And this is something that I talk a lot about, and I've talked about it in my telegrams, in my first newsletter that I wrote. I talk about it in some of my videos, and I've never ever heard any other coach or consultant mention the importance of family traditions. And I put a interesting angle on it. I talk to my top 1% world builders about this, and I use the term going to town with your stories. Going to town with your stories. I'm a storyteller. My father is a storyteller. My grandfather is a storyteller. And I learned very early in my life that if you want to have impact, if you want to teach something, if you want somebody to remember something, connect a story to it. Whether it's a video, me telling you a story every morning, whether it's a fax, whether it's a written telegram, my newsletter is story after story after story. These videos are story after story after story. You're giving a speech, story after story. All of your marketing, advertising, and promotion should be a story after story after story. And not just random stories, but stories that connect the one thing that you're trying to get across. You have a webinar, it should be connected through stories, personal stories. We're hardwired as human beings. We're hardwired to remember stories. So why not use that to our advantage when you're communicating with our queen, our secret weapon best friend, our children, our grandchildren, stories. My dad is an incredible storyteller. When he comes to visit on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon, he literally sits in the corner by the fireplace and tells Emery one story after another. And what does she end up remembering from that day? What does she keep asking Grandpa to retell and retell every time we get together? Thanksgiving, Christmas, Easter, any time we're together on the weekends. Grandpa, can you please retell that story about the time you were arrested jumping the icebergs in Perth? Can you retell the story of the general store? Can you retell the story? Can you retell the story? So they're anchored in her conscious and subconscious. But the most important thing here as kings, and from reading this New York Times article, is the critical importance of us educating and letting our children know and understand and passing down our family traditions, our genealogy, our history and our roots. When you think about it, you know, traditions are created for us to remember. The greats of the Dallas Cowboys, the great players of the New York Yankees, the great champions of the Montreal Canadiens. Those are three examples of traditions of franchises, you know, the most valuable franchises who have incredible traditions. They have, you know, decades and decades and decades of success and some failures, but they honor the greats. You walk into those locker rooms, you walk into those stadiums, and it's just honoring the greats. Wall of Fame, Ring of Fame. You know, he was the greatest ever. This guy's in the Hall of Fame. Tradition, tradition, tradition. And what is tradition created for in sports? For us to remember. For us to remember. So the same thing in our businesses and our personal lives. What's the tradition of your business? And what are the traditions in your family? And bringing those to life through the power of going to town with the stories. McLean Insurance was 45 years old the day I sold it. My dad had started that company with a phone book, with the yellow pages, didn't have a single client when he walked in the door, and over 45 years, he built that company up. And then I joined him in 2004, and we built that company, you know, from one single client up to almost $15 million in size, 9,000 clients. But that was the story that we constantly told our employees. When I would gather us together for one of our monthly stand-up meetings, which wouldn't take more than 10 minutes, I would pass out the bonus checks. I'd commend the people that had excelled. I would talk about our wins, our losses, and our goals for the next month, and then we would spin the wheel. But one of the things I always had in that 10 minutes was a quick story about the history of the business. You know, my dad started this business when he dropped me off at kindergarten. My dad started this business in 1972. My dad started this business with the yellow pages. He didn't have the internet, didn't have technology, didn't have any of that stuff as an advantage. And these are the types of stories that I constantly told to my employees. Does it make a difference? According to this 2013 New York Times article, it makes a massive difference because people want to be connected to something important. They want to be connected to history. They want to be connected to success. They want to be connected to winning. Now, I did this a ton with my Perth Blue Wings hockey team every year. When I did my training camp recruiting web presentation to the parents, I'd have 75 people at the arena, and this is recruiting season. And what was the number one thing that I talked about? I didn't talk about, your kid can play this much, or we want, we have this amazing power play, or we have this great dressing room, locker room. I didn't talk about any of that stuff first and foremost. What I addressed was the fact that this is our 97th year that we are the New York Yankees of junior hockey. We are the Montreal Canadiens of junior hockey. We are the Dallas Cowboys of junior hockey in terms of legacy, in terms of success, in terms of championships. So I was just telling stories about our roots, about our history, about the great players that played in Perth. This guy played and then played in the National Hockey League and won a Stanley Cup. This gentleman played in Perth, then played in the National Hockey League. Just history, 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 and going to town with the stories. And I had that room of 75 players and parents mesmerized by the history of the Perth Blue Wings. This is our 97th year. This is an opportunity for you to do something special. This is an opportunity for your son to be part of something special, not just playing for another team, but playing for the Yankees or playing for the Cowboys or playing for the Montreal Canadiens. And I mean, that was our number one recruiting weapon, was the fact that we offered players to have an opportunity to be part of something special. And how did we do it? We went to town with the stories about our history, about our 97 years in our community in junior hockey. So when you look at this as a personal thing, which is more important than business, it's more important than sports. This 2013 article talked about the importance in our children, that it's linked to self-esteem. And I mentioned this the other day. How are we going to protect our kids, our teenagers, and our adult children against online hate and bullying and all this stuff that goes on? Most of it's not even new. But how are we going to bulletproof our children against the adversity and the challenges and the anger that they're going to face? Well, my remedy was to build their self-esteem, which is done by challenging a child, by pushing a child, by demanding that they do their best and achieve. But another link to self-esteem, and it was mentioned in this 2013 article, was the fact that children that have a direct link to their past, they know who their great-grandparents were. They know who their grandma and grandpa were. They know their parents' history. They know both sides of the family. They have this mentality that they're part of something bigger than just themselves. They're not engrossed in just individualization like we see today from so many people. It's not just about them. They're coming from something very, very different. So my question for you then becomes, how can we do a better job of teaching our family history, our genealogy, our roots, and our traditions to our children, to our kids, to our teenagers, to our adult children? And I think of the question, do they know? This is what I ask myself, do they know? So ask yourself this question, do they know? Do your kids know things like, do they know when you and your secret weapon wife first met? Do they know where you met? Do they know the story of your first date? Do they know the person that introduced you, that then introduced you to your wife? Do they know about their birth in terms of not just where they were born? Do your children know who the doctor was? Do they know the time of day? Do they know the details of the pregnancy? Do they know the story of their birth? Do your children know everything and anything about their grandparents, their grandmother and their grandfather? Do they know the story of how they met? Do they know the story of when they got married? Do they know the story of how many children they had, their aunts, their uncles? Do they know the stories of the dirty 30s, the 20s, the Depression that grandparents and great-grandparents went through? Do they know that history of their family? Do your kids know back to when, if and when, our ancestries came to the United States or came to Canada? This is something that we talk a lot about in our family. We come from Scottish descent. So we've traced it all back to when our great-great-great-grandparents came from Scotland to Perth, which is a Scottish settlement, our community here. And my daughter, even though she's only 9 years old, she's fascinated with our family history. She's fascinated with her family roots. She's fascinated with our traditions. So these questions are, do they know? Do they know all of your stories from middle school and high school? Do they know the story if you remember your first day of kindergarten? Do they know the stories of your favorite teachers and mentors? And do they know the stories of, if and when you were baptized? Were you, I tell Emery all of my being involved with the United Church stories, singing and putting on performances and public speaking and volunteering. And she just loves when I go to town with all these stories. Do they know is my question. Do they know about your struggles? Do they know about your failures? Do they know about your embarrassments? Do they know what it was like when you were a teenager? Do your children know what it was like pre-World Wide Web? I mean, our young children today have no concept of a life before the internet. They have no concept of a life before smartphones. It's your job as leader of your family to make sure that they have context in life. My dad owns my grandfather's 1913 black original Model T Ford. And my grandfather was a mechanic. He owned the general store. And this was his car that he had since he bought it, first purchased it. It's all original, 1913 black Model T Ford. So when my grandfather passed away, my mom and my dad purchased or inherited the 13 Model T, and it's in my parents' garage in stellar condition. My dad can drive it. It's got the 3 pedals on the floor, the whole thing. It's been in all 3 of our weddings. That's my grandfather's 1913 Model T. But thinking of traditions, my every time we're out at Grandma and Grandpa's and I have Emery with me, we take off the cover and she gets up and sits in the Model T Ford. And she plays with the horn and she sits up in the driver's seat and she sees the 3 pedals and how you change the gears. She sees the crank at the front. You started it by cranking it. She puts the roof up, the roof down. She sees the windshield wiper with the hand. You use the windshield wiper on the flat windshield by hand. And all these things that she's seeing when I take her up and put her in the car and Grandpa sits up there and we talk about her great-grandfather. We talk about all the parades that this vehicle's been in. We talked about her grandfather going to town once a week. It was a big deal to drive 5 miles into town. That was grocery day. That was banking day. Everything was done at the same time because you worked the rest of the days. I tell her the stories of how her Nana, my grandmother, would take the train to school on Mondays and take the train home on Fridays. This is for high school where grandma would take the train and stay over for 4 or 5 nights in Perth, only a 10-minute drive in a car today, but she would literally take the train to school Mondays, stay over all week, attend school, and come back home to the farm on Friday nights. And, you know, for my daughter, Emery, she's just fascinated by these stories. She's like, you know, Grandma took the train and stayed overnight, and I show her the building in town where Nana used to spend her weeknights. She was a room and boarder, all this stuff. We talk about the opportunities, you know, Grandma and Grandpa never had the opportunity to go to college or university. It wasn't even discussed. And then my parents, Emery's grandma and grandpa, you know, like even though my mom was a incredible student, the opportunity just was never there to go beyond high school. So these are all amazing stories to go to town with. And this is why I'm such a believer in the family dinner, something that's disappearing from our world. Like at 6 p.m. every night, if you want to assassinate Michael McLean, you can do it at 6 p.m. at the dinner table, because that's where I'm going to be every single night. There's very few exceptions during the year. I put everything around it. I play tennis after dinner. It's one of those things that's non-negotiable for me. And we sit down at 6 o'clock every night, and whether we're outside or inside, and we just go to town with the stories for an hour. Krista's an amazing cook, and we just talk, and it's story after story. And, you know, I get the eye rolls all the time. So I start every meal the same way, and the laughter begins. It's like, well, I remember when I grew up in the back of the general store, and I just love being that guy. I love being the storyteller. I love sharing my wins and losses with my daughter and my wife. And I share them over and over again because they, you know, especially Emery, she can't get enough of it. But it's just amazing. Instead of sitting there and whining and complaining or talking about politics or sitting there on your phone, we're connecting every single dinner. And often at lunch and breakfast, I'm there telling the stories of our family. I'm telling my daughter and my wife about the roots, about our roots. As you may or may not know, my dad was an orphan. He was abandoned as a child after 30 days of the hospital. So he went into foster care, and then he was adopted. My dad was adopted into a McLean family. So I've sat down with my dad on several occasions, and we talk about his biological family. Like, I wanted to know about his biological father, his biological mother. Does he have any brothers and sisters? These are the people that gave him up. And he knows all about it. He's gone to visit his brother. He went and visited his sister. These are his biological siblings. And it was just amazing to hear him talk about their family. His biological name is Murray. And just to talk about his father and the challenges that he had, and his mother and the challenges that he had, and the reason that he was surrendered, the reason that he became an orphan. And then I love his stories about his adopted parents, about how, you know, when they adopted him, they were near 70, and his dad had a general store, and his dad had a team of horses, and they were so poor. But they were happy people. And he tells me about his 6 brothers and sisters, and they were much, much older than him when he was adopted into the family. So he was basically an only child. But it just goes on, the history and the roots and the family tree. And then I pass this on to Krista, and then I pass it on to my daughter, Emery. And it's just amazing how we remember stories, how we remember these stories of our families, how tradition makes us remember. And the other thing I'll say in conclusion is that build your own family traditions. Even if you don't follow your family traditions, it's critical that your children know them, but also get busy building your own traditions with your wife and your children and your grandchildren. Whether it's Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter or long weekends, what are the games you play? Do you have a specific place like a cabin or a place that you go once a year, a camp or something where you're off the grid? What are the traditions that you're building and having your own traditions as well as traditions of the past? So I wanted to share that. I thought that was an incredible article in the New York Times about the importance of us, especially as badass leaders, to share your stories, to share your history, to share your wins, your losses, to go to town with your stories so that your children know they're a part of something bigger than themselves. They're a part of a grand family. They're a part of history. They're a part of something bigger than themselves. And what did I say the proven result is? They're going to have higher self-esteem. They're going to have more resiliency. They're going to deal better with adversity, and they're going to be a healthier and happier kid and young adult because of it, because of your stories, because of your teachings, because of the tradition they know about. And if they don't know about your family tradition and they don't know all about your mess ups and your screw ups, then get busy going to town with the stories. I will share something that has been very effective for me as a relatively new father. Is my daughter's in the age now where she'll come home from school the odd day, not very often, and she'll say something about, this person was mean, or this person was cruel, or this girl said something, or this boy said something. And of course, this goes on, and it's relentless as she gets older. But here's the thing that I've discovered as a new dad is one of the vaccinations, or maybe you want to call it a remedy for these types of things when she brings them to me, is I tell a story. I tell a story about something similar that happened to me when I was her age in public school. And I tell her, I listen to her, I let her get it out. She talks about it. She gets it off her chest. And then I tell her a similar story that happened to me. And I got to tell you, you should see, it's like the weight of the world just lifts off her shoulders. It's like a 2,000-pound piano is off her back, because now she has context that this isn't new, that I was bullied, and I was, it's just part of life. I mean, I was in fights, and I was in scraps, and I was in the principal's office, and I had good friends, and I had bad friends, and I had mess ups, and I made mistakes, and all this kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, you just see the weight of the world come off of our children. It's like, really, Daddy? You went through this as well? And then I'll tell a story. I'll say, I had a friend one time who I thought was my best friend, and then they weren't, and I'll tell the story. Or, like if you have 2 or 3 good friends, that's more important than having 15 people that aren't really your friends. But just go into town with the stories, and every time that weight just lifts from her. So, I mean, we can use that with our spouse. We can use that with our employees. We can use that with our children, our grandchildren, but going to town with the stories. Let's do a better job of connecting our families. Let's do a better job of letting our God-given children understand that they come from something much bigger than just themselves. They have a history there to know. They need to know about their own birth, their own life. They need to know about your life, your queen's life, your grandparents. Where did they come from? What did they do? How did they struggle? The olden days. Tell them about the olden days, and they'll love every part of it. and make sure that's part of dinners and sit downs if you really want interest. Trust me, the cell phones go down, the smartphones are turned off when Yours Relentless starts with the stories, and I just keep going to town with the stories. I don't care if it was my Blue Wings or my McLean Insurance Agency or my barber shop or my wife or my daughter. It's just story after story about, you know what? This is what we did. This is what worked. This is what didn't work. This was embarrassing. This is the whole thing. Last night at dinner time, my daughter goes to the horse barn on Tuesday. So what was I talking about last night before she left? She was at camp and she's talking about these go-karts. These professional bought go-karts are all shiny and they're electronic and all this stuff. So what do? I tell her about the go-karts that my brother and I built out of wood, hammer and nail, nailed on the tires, used the ropes as the steering wheel, got in. The only thing that was out of the go-kart was our head. And my brother and I would get in these like a bobsled made by lunatics, and we would go down this massive hill, like on a paved road. My mom and dad wouldn't have any clue whatsoever. And we would push ourselves down this massive hill. And half the time we'd crash, half the time we'd blow a tire, half the time the thing would fall apart. And we would do this day after day, but we would actually build our go-karts out of wood. And you should have seen the look on Emery's face. She was just fascinated by this. Like, you built what? I want to do that. And the old treehouse stories. She's like, I want to build a treehouse with you, Daddy. And all this stuff. You know, when I was building a treehouse one time, my dad heard the truck backing up. Beep, 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 beep. And they were delivering wood and cement to our home without my dad knowing so that I could build this treehouse. I went on the phone and I called up. He had an account somewhere, and I phoned up this place and I said, I need some lumber and I need some cement and some other tools, some shingling nails. And they delivered it out thinking that it was approved. And my dad was like, what the hell is this? And these are the stories that you have. You have them, I have them, and they need to be told and shared. That's what's going to help with divorce rates. That's what's going to help with disconnection with your children. That's what's going to help bring back the most important thing. There's nothing more important to me in my life than my family. So I'm going to go to town with the stories to make sure that we stay connected, that there's lots of laughter in our home. There's lots of tears in our home. There's lots of growth, connection, and that my wife and daughter know in every fiber of their body that they're a part of something bigger than just themselves. That's it. Speaking about being a part of something bigger than just yourselves, I have my badass 5-star champions mastermind coming up this fall. If you want to be part of it and not left on the sidelines with everybody else, go to badasschampion.com. I've got a handful of spots, 15 badass leaders only. You fill out the form. There's 5 questions. You and I get on the phone in a week or two and we discuss whether I'm the right coach for you, whether hard coaching 12 months is for you or not. But the bottom line is I'm going to be in your life for the next year, and I'm going to make sure that you 10x every area of your life. You'll have no choice. You'll have to 10x your income. You'll have to 10x your health. You'll have to 10x your marriage. You'll have to 10x you'll be going to town with the stories. You're going to be 10xing your connection with your children. And that's what happens when you hand me 50 grand. If you give me 50 grand, I help you 10x your life, and I hold you accountable. And it has to happen or you're not part of the next mastermind the following year. So if you want that kind of top 1% of 1% accountability and hard coaching, then I'm your guy. If you're satisfied with where you are and you're satisfied with the way you're progressing, that's great too. I don't care whether you join or not. Then, you can read books and newsletters and all that stuff is fantastic as well. But if you're looking to scale your life, if you're looking to scale your world, if you're looking to 10x everything, then go to badasschampion.com and fill out that form. It's the best ROI you'll ever have. 50 grand to 10x your income, 10x your wealth, 10x everything in one calendar year. I don't fuck around. Badasschampion.com. Remember to hug your wife and your children and tell them how much they mean to you, and go to town with those stories. Make sure you're always building that connection with your past, with your history, with your family tree, and all that great stuff. Tradition is important. Make sure you do the opposite of what everyone else is doing nowadays and build that knowledge in your children. Build that self-esteem and build that connection with the past. Get busy going to town with the stories. Michael McLean, 2 words that changed my life, 2 words that'll change your life. Be relentless.